Welcome to the Last American Vagabond. Well, there's been so much going on. I mean, as long as you want to look back, but lately it seems like it's gotten out of control. And we've covered a lot of important topics over the last so many years in a really short period of time. But really after the COVID-19 illusion, a lot changed. But since the discussion of October 7th forward, a lot of attentions have been very focused. Even myself focused on this very important topic. But we shouldn't forget how many other important things deserve our attention. Myself, I've been talking about East Palestine, and I don't think we should be forgetting about that horrendous discussion, which is obviously interestingly relevant and connected to the story of Lahaina. And whether we see that as a connection in regard to the disasters happening all over the place or the way that the governments are trying to cover it up, there's a lot of these things happening. And this is just a few of them. But Lahaina was a really important point in this conversation where I think a lot of people in Maui and elsewhere were very critical of the way that they handled this, the lack of action, the choices that were made leading up to the awareness of what happened. And I thought it was a really important time in the midst of all of this to invite Shelby from Unjected back on to discuss what she's seeing on the ground, the updates that have happened since we had our last, I think we've had 2 interviews before this, and really just dive into a few more important points that we thought were relevant to understanding the full picture here. So Shelby Hosana, thank you for joining me. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Hey, Ryan, aloha. Thanks again for helping keep Maui in people's sights and thoughts. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah. We've had a couple of really good interviews, and I think that this story has always been there was something immediately wrong with this story. Like right out of the gate, there was a lot of people, and rightly so. You could show a lot of the usual suspects that will cry foul to every story, whether it turns out to be those two. But I think a lot of just average people were like, this doesn't add up. Something is wrong, whether we're talking about the blockages of letting people get to where they need to go, the lack of water, water being shut off, the sirens not happening, all the things we've already talked about. Something obviously was wrong. And then the way that it's been handled since then, and admittedly, I've been focused elsewhere, but even as we were covering it, it was very apparent that there was something wrong. Whether they were hiding something or just trying to avoid accountability. Right. So it's a very important story. And I know we'll touch on this. You have a book that just came out, Burn Back Better, and it's important information in there. But I wanted to start with you today in general and talk about, what's happened both since, I guess, the peak of this story when people were paying attention the most. And then again, like post October 7th and how much has changed and following up on some of these important topics. So Why don't we generally start with that first part? There was a moment where it seemed like everybody was talking about this story, and rightly so. It's very important. But then other things happened and people kind of lost their focus. And so what happened since then in regard to, let's just say, the missing children or the total or the ongoing recovery operation or dealing with the area in Lahaina? So there's a lot of questions there. So start wherever you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wish I, could say it was better news and to say that I've seen improvement with this, recovery and this whole process after the fire. But, it just continues to, remain just criminal and the culpability gets thicker and thicker as time continues. And, since we last spoken, I feel like that is where a lot of people dropped off with their attention span when they kind of decided that all of the children were accounted for. And I believe the last time we spoke, it was, the number was still sitting around 1,700. Then they had dropped that down to 400, then again to about 175. And now they just have said everybody is accounted for, no questions asked. But really, essentially, it was a lot of just shifting numbers on the board. I will say that thankfully, I have, like we've talked about before, I haven't seen parents looking for their children, but then it kind of raises that question again where, all of us still feel collectively as just local citizens that there is a huge discrepancy with the actual victims or the body count. People that I personally know have pulled out 9 children out of the water that were deceased, or one man who pulled out 100 bodies by himself. But yet we have this count that is actually just sitting at 99. And that I think is one of the most disturbing things to me in the moment. But yet again, like to the further part of your question, the housing crisis is just continuing. It feels like they are they're going out of their way to create a mass exodus. It's easier to kill people or get rid of them than to deal with them. And, it seems like in that moment, in these moments, especially with, whole entire condominium owners, they're, I would say, the ones facing the most issues with insurance right now. So like, for example, let's say there was a condo with 100 different tenants, all different types of rentals. Some were HOA. So some of them had private insurance, some of them owned their condo, but now the condominium owner is being left with this insurance claim, and they're being denied due to all of these little de facto red lines that are in there. So what will happen to all of these people? They are kicking the survivors that are left out of the resorts. And one thing that people aren't talking about is there's a massive amount of suicides also happening here on Maui. They're actually leaping off of the top of resort buildings because they have nowhere to go.
Yeah, that's just heartbreaking. I mean, it's such a sad situation in any of these circumstances. And, again, draws parallel to my mind in East Palestine, where people most people don't even know that it's changed from we'll take care of everything, don't worry, to now pennies in the dollar based on like some middle ground between the current basically zero value and what they claim it was worth beforehand. And they're just getting completely manipulated. And so these people, again, in the same situation, have nowhere to go. They don't know what to do. And, it draws parallels with other bigger stories in the world today. Yeah, exactly. I mean, what in fact, what we're even talking about here, quite frankly, if we're going to be real about it, is an occupier. The U.S. government is occupying Hawaii, and that's the reality. But we don't like to talk about that. And so the sad reality is, yet again, we see an example where the outside entities are taking advantage of the local population for many number of reasons. But so let's talk about those first 2 points in general. Let's start back with the kids, because I think that's very, very front and center in people's minds. And so for where we left off, as I remember it, we're talking about, it was something, whatever the highest number was, I remember that came directly from the school system that said simply that they had not re-registered. They couldn't verify where they had gone. Now, last I checked on that, there was the number had gone down, but overall there was still a large number of children that had not re-registered, well past the point. So then, of course, it's like, well, maybe they left, maybe they went to another island. All these things are possible. But as far as I could tell, there has never been any kind of alignment of this information, right? And we also know, as we covered at the time, there was a lot of parents that were killed because the children, there's no school, so they were left, and the parents were gone and they got killed. And so the question then becomes, if the child also got killed, there's no one looking for them at this point. How do we even really know? And I'm willing to believe, because of my, jaded perspective on government, but because of the way they've handled this, that they'd be willing to just pretend that's not happening and look the other way to avoid that accountability. That's my opinion. But so my question is, have you seen any kind of effort to display, here are all the children's names that we said weren't re-registered, and here are the ones that we've accounted for? Because that's the only way I'm going to believe that these children are accounted for at this point.
Yes, thank you for saying that, because I agree with you. Where is just any proof of their existence? You're right. We have not gotten a list of any of their names. And yes, you're right that at that highest point, there was 3,000 or so children that were registered brand new for the school year 2023. 3 weeks after the fire, it was over 2,000 still unaccounted for. And then, like I just mentioned, those other numbers that shifted around. But we should have a full manifest. The FBI has taken over the quote unquote missing persons list. What about the flight logs of people who have left island? What about, just the national school registration? Parents hold a contract with schools, and it's a legally binding contract to know how to contact you. Where are your children? And, that's been completely voided, let alone just the psychological, mind game that they're playing, that there's not one memorial in Maui. And you could imagine any other shooting or disaster, you see dozens of pictures and you see, stuffed animals and whatever. And the only thing that we have is a few crosses that they've erected on the west side. They've had to actually ask National Guard for permission to put these memorials up, but no one's allowed to go stop and go acknowledge that. Where's the acknowledgement for any of these people? And I do think that it was whole families that are gone, and they were they were vaporized. There's literally nothing left of them. So do they have to hold accountability for bodies that don't exist anymore? I fear that they're not. And especially for the undocumented migrant workers, which were thousands of people in Lahaina. The census is very inaccurate when you count in all of these people who were from other countries working under the table cash jobs. I fear that that's most of the victims that have perished, and that's why we're not hearing about them, because they can be an invisible murder, and the government can just get away with that.
Well, what are the community leaders saying at this point in time? I'm forgetting some of their names, but at the time, I mean, there was I forget his name. I don't want to mistake, but he's a very famous surfer who was local in Lahaina.
Yeah,
specifically. Yes, and him and some of these others that were very vocal. What are they saying right now in regard to any of these topics? Are they what are their sentiments? Do you know?
It definitely dropped off as people's attention to the issue dropped off, and it kind of feels like people are naturally exhausted by feeling that trauma over and over again, and so they also just don't want to acknowledge that the problem is still continuing. What I would say is it seems more almost like a Stockholm syndrome, kind of like everybody realized that they're kind of in this abusive relationship with the government and the state of Hawaii, but yet everybody's also like, oh, we're gonna hold out, or we're gonna accept help, or we're waiting for our daddy government to save us somehow. Even to the point where this week Josh Green had announced that he was going to give $1 million to any family member who had lost a loved one.
The governor, right?
Right, with the caveat being that you can't hold a lawsuit against the state of Hawaii. Right. I mean, is that not a gag order or what? It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, on one side of it, at the very least, I agree with you, but at the very least, it's nice to see them be. I mean, $1 million is a lot of money especially for somebody who is in this position. Nonetheless, I agree with you. I think it's actually kind of grotesque that you're even using that moment to try to avoid accountability, which really does show you, like, well, here's the main way to frame this. You should, especially when it's aid for people that there's a lot of them that, and rightly so, feel that their lack of choices or choices that were bad put them in this position. There should not be some kind of barrier between them and the aid that you promised was going to be coming. Like, that shows you a problem right there. It really does. And so, to your knowledge, does it seem a lot of people are taking this up on the eyes? Has it even started yet?
Well, it hasn't started yet that I know of. But I'm imploring people, and thankfully, a lot of people are also saying, I'm sorry, this does feel a little odd that, not that they announced it on the 3-month mark, which is kind of offensive, that, oh, hey, everybody, just silent down on all these unanswered questions that you have, all of these disturbing pieces of evidence that are coming forward. We don't want you to focus on that. We want to be this shining superstar light. And here's our apology. And the way he actually had framed it, which I thought was so gross, is he said, as an Ohana, we're all taking responsibility. And, Josh Green, we don't take responsibility for your disaster capitalism or mass murder. You are not part of our Ohana. And so, I think yet again, it's just this the psychological game that continues. And also, if there's only, they say that this fund, I believe that they're taking the money from is about $150 million. So 99 of it will go to people who lost loved ones. And then the rest is supposed to be distributed to people who have injuries or whatever. But isn't that convenient that their victim count was just enough for their budget? It wasn't like they're coming forward and saying, oh, we realized that it was actually thousands of people and we're going to pay back retribution for thousands of people, because we would bankrupt the state of Hawaii, or quite frankly, the United States that's occupying Hawaii, with that, I believe.
Well, that's interesting, actually. So the amount just seems to perfectly end up being the amount of people. That's actually very interesting. Certainly coincidence happened, but I don't usually believe in them. But what's interesting to me, though, is, so where's this money coming from? So this is state money. So these are tax dollars. So see, this is what always drives me crazy about this, is so effectively we're paying for are paying out of our pockets to help. It's not like the individual. There's a lot of Americans and elsewhere that are be willing to say, here, take some help. But the idea that it's kind of always expected that that's the reality. Like it's just people I think the people who made these choices should be accountable financially and everything else. But I just hate the idea that the Hawaiians and everybody else are the ones that end up being on the hook for their choices.
Right.
So go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say, and it's something interesting that's happening to the Hawaiians right now in this peculiar moment that deserves some attention is the fact that these generational bloodlined, Hawaiian people who can trace back their lineage, they've lost their, birth certificates, their legal documents in the fire. One man I know in particular, which actually I know several people it's happened to, but he's the one that sounded the alarm bell for me. He's extremely Hawaiian. He gets back his birth certificate from the state that he reordered the digital copy because, as we know, there's no original copies anymore. Everything is now electronic. Right. So he gets back his electronic copy of his birth certificate. Nonetheless, they removed Hawaiian from his race. And instead, they put Asian mix, Japanese, Caucasian mix. So they effectively they doctored his birth certificate to remove Hawaiian, be a different race. Are they doing this to all of the Hawaiians that were left over? And are they going to have now an issue claiming native heritage rights on this land as well? Because they cannot prove through their legal documents that they're Hawaiian, let alone does it kind of raise the question that they're going to say, well, to prove that you could do DNA testing, which is something that they were already asking the Hawaiians to do. They said, oh, please come do DNA testing so we can do forensics on the ash that was left over. But you can't do forensic on ash. So what really was the play there? Removing the heritage and then also this DNA, side piece. It's an interesting.
It's terrible. I mean, it makes me physically angry just by hearing, because the frustrating part about this is not only are, again, whether or not you think this was orchestrated, planned, allowed to happen, these things will happen because of governments, regardless, after the fact, taking advantage of a situation. And so now you've got this classic historical battle between the native peoples of Hawaii, who have always been fighting off the occupiers and fighting off the land grabs and fighting off every aspect of this, who are now going to be challenged potentially on the actual heritage. But even more than that, it brings up another possibility in my mind that what about everything else? What about deeds or old, information? But things were very, as I think you made the point in our last discussion about the classic Lahaina area and this is one of the reasons people argue that the fire was likely because of the way that things were, the way that yards were and the older buildings and so on, which there's plenty of places like that in this country. But the idea that they probably have older documents about, transactional, land discussions or changing. I'm trying to think of the right word for this, but any kind of document that would be able to prove your ownership over something, whether that be land or vehicles or anything, that's now going to be gone too. And then if there's somebody in a position that could benefit from this, then those, you can just pretend like they don't have the documentation. So we'll have to go through some kind of process. And now you're in this new process, like with the same digital, everything else. I mean, this is, I'm not trying, everything about this feels very wrong in the sense that it feels like it's leaning in that direction of things that we all kind of see going. I just am really battling on whether I think all of this could have happened to this effect, to make this happen, because that's very sinister. And I never want to shy away from that possibility, but let's talk about that. So, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, finish.
Well, I was going to go into that topic, but you have a comment on that? Go ahead.
Oh, just, I think the reason that it is so sinister and that they're pulling off this, whoever they may be, because kind of like maybe as an example, if we're just a little rock in the middle of this lake called the ocean, what happens when you throw a rock into a lake? It ripples. It ripples all the way to the edges, right? And that's kind of what's happening here is we're this little island floating and we're rippling. And this is a ripple effect for what will happen for the rest of the world. And, practice makes perfect. And, what a perfect place to practice war games. Just cut off communications. They're stranded 2,500 miles in any direction from anybody. And, let's just hold the magnifying glass over the ants and let's see what they'll do.
Yeah.
And even to the point where I believe that this discrepancy with the body count could even be a part of this experiment. I think they could actually be going as far as doing a social experiment on the citizens of Hawaii and saying, can thousands of people be missing or dead? And can we convince them that it was 99 because an authority figure told us so? Collective, we believe that that's not true. But is it a social moment where they're saying, will they do anything?
Yeah.
Will they? Well, and it's kind of why they built that riot. I call it the riot fence for a reason. It was like kind of like that was their backup plan just in case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, plenty of people who are always desperately afraid of anything that suggests that their government may be in doing things like you're describing are always so quick to push back, conspiracy theory. But the point is that these things just like you described have happened repeatedly throughout history, both American history and elsewhere. So it's just amazing to me how quickly people will dismiss the possibility that a government could allow or orchestrate something like this for any number of reasons, even just literally trying to see what would happen. There's endless evidence for things like that, whether testing chemical or biological agents on people like in San Francisco in Operation Sea Spray, these provable moments. So it really does unnerve me that we have so much evidence, and whether or not this connects to larger discussions like we originally thought. But back into the point about, you use the word murder, right? So clearly you still believe that this was something that, well, why don't you tell me, where do you stand on this now? Are we talking about something that you feel was created, executed, or allowed to happen, or are they now just capitalizing on their malfeasance and lack of good choices and decision-making process? Where do you stand on that?
Well, I could say it's a little bit of all three. Do I think that it could have been a premeditated murder? Definitely. Whether it was just intentional or unintentional manslaughter, definitely. But when you look at the recovery and how nobody came and what happened and what's happened since then, I think it all signs point towards negligence and criminal activity. They've gone so out of their way to make Lahaina a crime scene, and even to the fact with the cleanup process, which I find really interesting, is that Maui County said that any structure over 120 square feet, which, mind you, that's like a shed or a closet. If your home was bigger than that, you are not allowed to remove any debris from the area. You have to have Maui County privately do that for you. You're not allowed to dispose of any ash, anything. And where are they taking it? They've said themselves that the Army is doing the cleanup of the ash and the debris. It's kind of odd. What are they, why is the Army taking this evidence away? What are they doing with it? And, as we also see, people are only getting into their homes in these zones. So
that's still happening to this point?
They're not still happening. Some people won't even be able to see their home until next year.
I've never understood that from the moment that began. If this is their property and their home and their belongings, even in an investigation, I've never seen this before, where people are like boxed out of their land and their home this long. I mean, how long has it been now since this happened?
3 months. And 3 months. Yeah. So even some people next year, will you even, if there was even anything to find, would you find it after it's been out in the elements for 6 months and sprayed with soil tack?
Well, yeah, right. Which we'll get to. But what about the possibility that a child or somebody is buried under the rubble or trapped in a location? No, does anybody even? I mean, I guess we were told that they were looking, right? But I mean, again, we're very skeptical.
That actually happened to somebody that I know. Their son, who was a 15-year-old, he perished in the fire. They told his parents that there was no body or no sign of him in the home. They broke in the middle of the night and they found his body and they pulled him out of there.
My God.
And that has happened to several people. I mean, I've heard of, a man listening to his whole family burn up on the phone in the car. And now that these body cams are coming out, Those are also proving to be that the police had communication the whole time. Out of the 200 hours of body cam footage, they've only released about 20 hours of it. And mind you, some of it's so redacted or fuzzy or cut off that you can't tell what's happening. But in these body cam videos that are just coming out, the police are 100% well aware that they should be evacuating. There's just confusion. They don't know who they're taking orders from. It was just a massive shit show. And so, was that an intentional? No. I mean, maybe that's just, unintentional manslaughter. But, I do believe that the state of Hawaii and the federal government, that they need to be held accountable for this. And I'm definitely not going to stop until they do.
Good. Well, of course, in my opinion, if this was something that was a deliberate, allowed to happen or created thing, the average policeman on the street corner wouldn't be in the know. That's never how that works. But
True.
So let's go through it very quickly and let me know if I miss anything. So we know that the water was deliberately turned off, right? Mm-hmm. We know that the alarm systems, that I guess, and correct me if this has been updated since then, failed to work. I believe there's an overlap on whether that was a choice for some reason, but we know that they blocked them in under the guise, I guess it turned out, because they were told that there were down power lines. But this is while you can literally see a massive firewall coming in behind. And then we know that people literally died in those spots in the traffic that they were being held in. Right. And we know that we have the guy and multiple other witnesses that were there on film, by one of them after the fact saying this on film, that he asked them and he said they were told to hold them there for whatever. And again, that's what turns out they claim because of the down power lines. But the dynamic logically doesn't make sense. Right. So, and what else am I missing? I know there's other parts to this where go ahead.
Well, even since that initial few little comments that were made by police officers or law enforcement, now they've been all signed NDAs. Nobody is allowed to actually talk about anything. The fire department, the police department. One thing I thought was ironic was Mayor Bisson said that he was going to recuse himself of the MECO /HECO lawsuit because his daughter is one of the main people at Maui Electric Company. And so he felt like it would be a conflict of interest, and that's why he's not going to sue. I mean, everybody is somebody's auntie, uncle, brother. The amount of, handshakes happening behind closed doors is, it's insane. And, I can imagine that's also what's keeping this so secretive, because everybody has some sort of incentive, whether it's protecting a family member or they're getting paid to do so.
You said an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. Who are they signing this with?
That's what I would like to know as well. The state of Hawaii, who's gag ordering these people? Right. There was a few stories that we heard that just those initial days after the fire, where a couple firemen had talked about, which in particular this story, that they were putting out the fire and suddenly their fire truck stalled to the point where it just stopped working. And that kind of hinted at EMP to me. But at the same moment that the fire truck stopped working, their captain had a heart attack. And all of the firemen had to go assist the captain having the heart attack during the middle of this fire. And you kind of go, what? Yeah. What? That was an interesting story. Do you have more stories to tell? Nope. NDAs. Everybody signed an NDA, even to the point where ambulance drivers, I'm hearing these little videos come out where they're saying, we're finding bodies that are flash frozen in positions that they couldn't scientifically be in, animals on all fours, dead, standing up, deceased. They still have all their hair. They're not burned, but they're frozen and they're deceased.
When you say frozen, you mean stiff or you mean frozen?
Frozen, like imagine Pompeii people, that's
right.
What it
but
looks
just
like
to clarify, you mean it got so cold that they're frozen stiff as
so
ice.
Hot.
But okay, so yeah, so they're stiff, frozen in that sense. Okay, where's that coming from? Is that something's been confirmed, or is that a statement that's relayed from somebody?
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is just Coconut Wireless, but these are, I feel, reasons why they made everybody sign these NDAs.
Yeah.
They did not want these first responders or law enforcement, spreading any kind of this information that would make people scratch their heads and go,
Yeah.
well, that's a little weird. Why would a dog be, dead on all fours standing in the middle of the room?
There's clearly a lot of anomalies. So in no way am I suggesting that that's not, it's just, that's a strange claim. And so definitely we want to make sure we can prove that. But there's so many things we can get into. Again, I want to revisit or just make sure people listening. It's very strange to me that anybody, so for people that understand, a non-disclosure agreement is usually something that somebody signs like after they're going to leave a business, and they have insider information, and they go, okay, I swear that I won't tell that information to anybody else. And a lot of times it has to do with like proprietary information, blah, blah, blah. The fact that you're having law enforcement sign an NDA from who, by the way, because that's very telling. A company, I find it hard to believe the government would make them sign NDAs. So, but who knows? But so that is a huge point that I need to dig into further, because that's really alarming. And it very clearly suggests that there's something that they don't want. It doesn't suggest, it bluntly states they don't want them saying something that they understand. And just trying to take a step back and not assume that it's some conspiratorial possibility. And I mean that in the real sense. I just don't see what else it could be that they would want them not to discuss. I'll leave it there, but that is
I'll say this. So the way they framed it, if I remember correctly, because the first people they started with was people in like the FEMA cleanup. They said, please do not take pictures of any sort of the disaster zone victims. And that's kind of how they, grew it from there, that, there was a few bad apples that went in from FEMA, and they took pictures of the disaster zone and they were sending them out. And it's like, well, what's wrong with that? That's your right to do that. But, like we're saying, it adds an interesting level of suspicion.
Well, it's either, is it a crime scene, which implies a crime was committed, or is it a cleanup effort after a natural disaster? They're very right. And your point earlier, they've treated this like a crime scene from day one, which I see all these points together clearly suggest that there's something that we're not being told, and every aspect of it. Now, we should be careful not to assume that means, the theory that whoever individually out there believe, but it definitely could. And I think that's important, that it's clear that there's something being withheld. So I had one more question on this same kind of general point, and it kind of brings us into that other hypothetical possibility discussion. You said ash, about the body's bones. Now, I'm not an expert, but bones typically do not get burned to ash, correct? Unless it is a super high temperature, like the kind of thing you use it like at a funeral home to reduce it to ash. As I understand it, maybe I'm wrong, but the fire shouldn't. So what's interesting about that is that would then at least open up the possibility of something like we talked about, the direct energy conversation, all these different possibilities. And I just think that's interesting. Do you have any thoughts on that? And even overlapping with the dog thing, like where do you see all that playing in?
Yeah, well, you're right. The temperature to make bone turn to ash is extremely hot. Let alone, other anomalies that we saw, which we actually dive in the book a lot about, the different temperatures and melting points of different, objects and even crematory, temperatures. But most of the people that had disappeared were reduced to nothing but bags of ash this big. No bones, no teeth, almost no identifying information. And actually, it's remarkable that they even were able to identify the people they did. And I assume it's probably just because of smoke inhalation, or, a lot of people were perished by jumping into the ocean. And so, obviously they were intact. But, gosh, I'm losing my train of thought there. But,
sorry, it was probably because I was typing, actually. But I was just looking up really quickly that I was interested to see if you can get DNA testing on ash.
And I don't think
DNA testing on burnt remains is possible if there's bone fragments. So if this has been brought down to absolute ash, it's interestingly overlapped with the other argument that, so if that's the case, then I guess it could be because they're asking for the bodies that weren't reduced to ash. But yeah, That's an interesting aspect to this too. This whole topic really does. And I know there are those out there doing it, and I encourage this. Somebody who is just entirely focused on this story and is investigating this with the wherewithal and the resources to do so, because there's a lot of these unanswered questions that, if left alone, sadly, like East Palestine, that nobody is going to keep asking. And that's just very disconcerting. Well, so let's bring this into the kind of cover-up side of this, or the ongoing part of it, and actually with the housing part of it too. So I want to talk about both what they claim to do with the plan, soil tack, and where that goes. But before that, the land part of this. So give us some updates on where, we heard right away, we saw things that you would expect, even if this wasn't some, manipulated situation. People in real estate frothing at the mouth to get in there and get a hold of some of these lands that they've sought after. And the people of Lahaina have been fending people like this off for as long as they've existed, since, post US occupation. We saw Oprah and the rest of them, all these weird overlaps. So where are they at with this now? Is there any new information about who's trying to take control? Are they going to make it all a monument? Like I think Green made the point to say, where are we at with the land grab aspect?
So this is definitely where everything feels like it's at a standstill, but you kind of, in my opinion, I'm just waiting for that shoe to drop. And, it's kind of like there's this maybe even cognitive dissonance that's happening where people are like, we're going to be able to rebuild. We're going to go back and we're all going to get our properties back. And like, there's kind of this hope, that everything is just going to go back to normal. But then on the other side, people are still kept out of the burn zone by the giant fence. National Guard still has it completely secured. People are only let in from their certain zones and then let out. So, is this a free-for-all for people to come back to the land? Certainly not.
I've never heard of that before, ever.
Yeah, let alone like the soil tack issue, which we spoke on before. Now they've gone to the actual extent of saying there is not an opt-out process, which is very interesting because initially they were kind of hinting that homeowners specifically, you could have your land privately tested and then you could kind of get away from the soil tack. Now they're saying that is not true at all. You have to do soil tack and there is no opt-out, which is frightening. And of course they're saying, well, we don't want any spots to be exposed and have runoff in those areas. But they also, I just found out, used soil tack here in Kula as well. And there was only about 20 houses that burned down on my side of the island over here. And we're nowhere near the ocean. So kind of this whole, excuse that they're using, well, we're using it for runoff reasons. What are they using it in Kula for?
Right.
If it is a glue that is designed to soak up radiation, is there leftover radiation in Kula that from some sort of technology used?
Is that what they're claiming? Is that what they're claiming? That's what it's used for? I don't see any evidence of that.
The DoD said that they used it in Afghanistan and Iraq to soak up uranium from the bullet casings from their war games. And that was what it was originally created for. Because
they're using your depleted uranium shells, which are a war crime. But yeah, let's ignore that admission, which we all know that they've done. But that's really fascinating. So what I argue they are implying with that is that this substance just absorbs everything. And I don't even. This is what's so crazy about it is, as we've done before, and since we're talking about it, I want to make sure I did. Well, first of all, before I get into what are they testing for? And so they've tested for and then decided to use soil tack. What are they testing for?
I would love to know as well. I had a friend privately test a sample that they got after sneaking into the burn zone. And frighteningly enough, so I would need to learn more about this specifically, but apparently there's about 10 elements in ash, or a burned substance will typically show the same 10 elements underneath it. What we're seeing out of the evidence coming out of Lahaina is that it only has 2 out of the 10, and it kind of suggests that it's been bleached, or that it's something that we've never seen before, because none of the elements are existing within that ash and within that debris. And is that why they're using soil tack? Because there is something incredibly wrong with whatever they've done to vaporize the ground or depleted it in some way. And I almost wonder if that's why you see so much of that white powdery ash as well. Everything was just brought down to a dust of white powder. And so I think it just leans again towards more suspicious, what happened.
Yeah. Well, what's very strange is this to me, the simplest aspect of this is the idea of how this would have been used. And what's interesting is you're, I guess, telling me that they've already begun using this.
Yes.
So I'd like to secondarily ask you if you've seen it and looked at it and looked at the substance. But before that, just, so we're talking about spraying over an area that people have still been like held back from invasively looking for themselves. To me, that's what seems like the most obvious. This is like gluing over what's not even a bad analogy, because it's essentially a polymer based solids or glue kind of
substance. They call it a glue. They do.
That ends up solidifying, right? So, and then it breaks and it dusts, and that dust can become combustible per their own information. We've covered this. So that in and of itself just seems like an effort to kind of like seal the area and then move forward from that. And so that is the most obvious. But in the idea to whether they're trying to potentially cover up something that they have done before, it's a perfectly valid possibility in there. Who knows what's actually happening in all this. So to the second part of it, so what, if you've seen it yourself, or have you actually got to walk on it or touch it?
I haven't. No. So I've seen others showing videos of it, and it's just frightening. I mean, these guys literally get dressed up in full white outfits. Yep. And then they actually are using basically like fire hoses in Lahaina.
Yeah.
And they just spray everything with it. And they say in about 24 hours, it's fully set. And that's when it becomes translucent. So yeah, it starts as this white color and then it goes clear. And there was one interesting where there was actually a podcast where it was like the EPA guy was talking about how safe it was, and he was answering concerns for one of our local Lahaina residents. And one thing I heard him say is, oh, well, it's completely non-toxic when dry, but it's supposed to be mixed with water and it goes on wet. So does that mean it's toxic when it's wet? Then he also says it's not supposed to be washed off by any of the rain. It's going to seal everything down for up to a year. But then he kind of said, oh, but if you have a picture, or if there's an item in your home that got sprayed with soil tack, you might be able to wash it off with soap and water. But then, we have people that call and then they say, is soil tack biodegradable or is it not? And we've gotten conflicting answers from that as well.
Right. Well, their own documentation, as we went over actually in this interview, as well as I think it was this one with this one here with this, our second interview that we went over, where we talk about this, their own documentation, which I'll include in the show notes again today, the information itself in here, which this is where I was just referenced, like here's the combustible dust point, but that this is polymer based right here. It's a synthetic vinyl copolymer. I mean, this is ridiculous. Like it's 98% synthetic vinyl copolymer. That's not a water-based substance that just that's something that is potentially problematic. And we went through all this information and broke it all down in the past. And the reality is it is potentially toxic in certain circumstances. And my bigger point was, like you said, the runoff aspect doesn't even apply, because at first, in general, they weren't even really trying to argue that that's what they were using it for. But then we also have the reality that we're talking about where it was designed in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the real point of it was simply just to maintain the ground so the dust did not spin up and cause problems for them and cause dust storms. But in my research, it seems very telling that the dust problem got rapidly worse once they left, which seems to suggest that what it does is it's not about actually help. It's about keeping the situation stagnant while they're invading countries and not worried about the after effects that it causes. So my worry is that if this is about keeping the runoff from happening, that once they stop caring about this will get worse. It'll break down, and the land itself will become even more likely to recede, run off, cause landslides. I mean, all sorts of things you guys know well in Hawaii. That's very concerning.
I mean, that's a great point. I mean, yeah, who's to say that all of Lahaina isn't going to fall right into the ocean in a year from now after this glue stops keeping it sealed, let alone, all of the people who are unaccounted for. You literally are pouring glue on a burial site. And that's how I feel about it. There's remains everywhere.
Right. And to add to this point about the weird kind of surreptitious nature of all this, as you pointed out to me, I hadn't seen this until we started. This is one of the documents we went over both in my show about this and our interview. And it now says account disabled by server administrator. it's just, there's so many of these. And if you want to see what it is, I have it on the way back machine. This is literally from Soilworks LLC, right? And so they have this, and the document goes over all the stuff that we discussed in here. And it even says right here, now it does say eco-safe and biodegradable, but it says liquid copolymer used to stabilize and solidify any soil or aggregate, as well as erosion control and dust suppression. None of that talks about any of the things that they're putting this forward other than the runoff, right? So, so in my opinion, I just think it's really telling that they would remove this and delete this kind of information. You also added this, was it this one? No, it's this next one right here, or this one. Maui mayor gives EPA the go-ahead to seal down Lahaina's toxic ash with soil tack. One of the points that stood out, which I thought was really interesting, saying, well, what West Maui County Councilwoman Tamara Paulton said she sent a letter to the EPA last month with a list of questions and concerns about soil tack, to which she said the federal agency did not respond. Over the weekend, she tried again, reaching out to Peter Gura, EPA Regional Incident Coordinator for the Maui fires. The answer she received from him left her dissatisfied. EPA said soil tack is not biodegradable, while the product's website says that it is. And there's all this back and forth about it. And I think that it just shows you that there's something definitely off with this whole thing. And I don't think this is even remotely about trying to help people in Lahaina. That's my opinion.
You know what's funny too? Even if you go back to that last one with Tamara, the quote right below, which I found humorous, is they said, well, even if it does run off into the water, look, even if a small amount is released, it's way better than a large release of ash. It's like they're kind of almost admitting, well, it you know, maybe it's better than the latter. You know, they're kind of giving their out there.
Right. I mean, well, and at the end of the day, ash is in general, I mean, if it's real ash burned to nothing, it's one of the purest substances on earth. It's a nothing. It's basically just burned, you know, and that's the reality. But what's interesting about this is if you really dig in, and I recommend both our interview and this in-depth discussion, the soil tack dust suppressant to be deployed in Lahaina, Maui, but is it safe? Let's look at the facts. And my clear conclusion was no, that this is not safe and this is not designed to be used in civilian public areas. It may be considered safe for general use if you're using it in passing on a military operation. But the idea that this is going to be in a location, again, in the exact location. Well, actually, one of the things I thought was interesting is the shoreline. Both documents I looked at in this discussion said that it should not be allowed to run off into the water, right? Yet they're talking about it using, well, I guess that's the point. It's meant to stop that from happening. But it shows you that when it comes into contact with the water, that it does break down. So you're guaranteeing you're going to have that. And that's why that statement makes sense. That, well, if it does, it's better than this or that. Well, I guess we'll find out.
Why,
right.
Well, you know, we'll find out with the reef and the fish and the whales and the sea turtles and all of that gorgeous, pristine water that is literally right there. You know, time will tell, of course.
I'm glad you said that.
That's, you know, part of the land grab, you know, oh gosh, you guys, we're so sorry. Soil tack didn't do its job. We messed up. It wasn't as safe as and effective as we thought. You know, we'll take that land from you. It's no problem.
I was just trying to glance in here to find the section where they talk about the animals, right? And now you said that, I forgot about this. There's clear, where was that? I'm just trying to find it off the top of my head, but there's a clear, oh, here we go. Here's one of them right here. You know, in their MDMS sheet, right, where it talks about, it does very clearly have an effect on specific, and this is, you know, minnows, rainbow trout, you know, in this case of 96 hours, where it's, you know, it's potentially toxic. Well, and this one gets into both of these, aquatic toxicity and terrestrial toxicity, earthworms, lettuce, you know, these are real. You're not going to hear about this from the EPA, and this is in all their information. And this is why I think these things are being pulled back. You know, it's anyway, I think that,
and mind you, and just one last thing, mind you, like the resorts are, you know, 5 miles away. And so all of these tourists are going to be also swimming in the soil tack water. You know, it's everybody is going to be implicated, you know, not just Lahaina. You know, it makes me wonder about our beaches on the south side of the island, or, you know, where is it going to go, actually, truly.
Right. I mean, this is not something that just, again, copolymer. It's not something that's going to just go away. It's clearly not the way they describe it. But yeah, I mean, I think that the EPA, for example, is still to this very day lying and obfuscating about what happened in East Palestine and the dioxins and the PFAS and benzene and everything else that they're currently shipping all over the place, with no concern for the fact that those locations aren't even set up to deal with that. But yet we're going to believe the EPA when they tell us X, Y, and Z for the next story. You know, it's blatant. And it's just so, I mean, I think it's a good thing that a lot of these situations that, the terrible silver lining on this horrible story is that people are no longer blindly taking their government at face value, which it always should have been that way. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
But I mean,
that's
look,
depressing.
there's a lot of other topics that we could get into around this topic. I mean, if there's anything else you want to get into before we kind of wrap and talk about your book and the information there, is there anything else that you want people to know about in regard to this story that is important, that we're missing, that you just, put a fine point down for people that want to know where to look?
Well, I would just say, it's actually, it's still ominously continuing, and the military presence in Hawaii has increased so much that, I do wonder if, is this because of Israel or Palestine? What is the reason? Or, was Lahaina the perfect reason for us to have an excess amount of military presence before a supposed war is to start? We are still having, just even last week, we had the green lasers all over the island again. They were shining on the Kahului airport, on the Kapalua airport. We've had military reconnaissance planes everywhere, flying around, doing searches. We've had, Red Dawn style paratroopers jumping on planes. It's whatever is happening here is still continuing. And so, I just, everybody keep your eyes on what happens here, because I do feel that this is a launching pad for, a lot of different things, and we're watching it kind of unfold. So this is the last thing I would say to people is it's continuing.
Yeah. And don't forget about it, right? Keep it in mind.
Yeah, don't forget.
You mentioned the green lasers. What is that?
Well, so earlier in the year, it actually was like January, February, there was they called it topographical satellite mapping from China, which they essentially shine this green laser across the whole entire island, and it's supposed to pick up perfectly on the topographics of this area. Weird. And that was very strange when it happened at the beginning of the year. It was Mauna Kea, Mauna Loa, and Haleakala that had caught the lasers going across the sky. Sure enough, it just happened again last week. And as soon as that one happened, it definitely got more I don't want to say excitement, but more acknowledgement this time, because then, yes, they sent out military planes within 15 minutes of that laser being spotted, and the presence was significant. So it kind of appeared to be that they don't even know what that is.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, I'm willing to bet that it's something that's probably tied to the energy directorate up there or something in that regard. But really, right. the main point for me is just there's probably a lot more to the building up of military presence and so on, but it could be just as simple as make sure the natives remember that you're under occupation, right? I mean, that's really what this comes down to. And I hope people don't think I was joking about that. Like, for the average person, and well, right, this is an occupied territory. Like, it's exactly what it was. It was taken and occupied. And that's why, as you've expressed yourself, I mean, I lived in Oahu a while back. I remember the same sentiment that most Hawaiians that I knew did not believe that they were Americans. They're Hawaiians, right? And they're under this occupation. And so this might just be, that people in Lahaina are kind of historically very anti the whole presence. So maybe this is just a way to say, we're not going anywhere, whether it's because of this or, that they're acting this way because of what happened. They just want to show them. I think the bottom line is this is the illegal occupier, and that's how we have to view this story. And that's what occupiers do. All right. They break the law.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you said that. Yeah. That's one thing that we talk about extensively in the book too, Burn Back Better, is educating people on what happened to Hawaii, because that is the first part of this story. Hawaii was an illegally annexed territory taken by gunpoint, where they forced Queen Liliuokalani to essentially sign under distress because she was worried that they were going to murder her family in front of her very eyes. That's how Hawaii became Hawaii. It was not sunshine and rainbows and everybody agreed and let's become America. It was absolutely a colonized and pillaged, taken, stolen land. And, that's one of the things that we, when we thought about the book and what do we want the main takeaway to be, is the Hawaiians deserve to have their land back. And this moment, as just absolutely devastating, and as it is, could also be used as the catalyst for true change, for them to get their sovereignty back, and to say, the U.S. obviously holding their illegal occupation did a terrible job. They've done nothing but, have just complete incompetence that resulted in criminal mass murder. There's just so many facets to this. And so I pray that people really wake up and see, wow, Hawaii is not this 50th state like that we've seen. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, I think it's an important message in general, right? I mean, I think this is the year of the awareness of the occupier, right? It does seem that people are shockingly aware of one of the most obvious occupations in the world right now. And I think that's a really important step, to become aware of how incredibly wrong this is, and how this truly destroys civilizations and destroys families and generational. And I mean, everything we've ever talked about in this topic, but all the rest in very similar ways that, I don't want to pull in that topic because that's, my mind just goes to this in general. But with this right now and what you're working on, I really hope that more people will pay attention and recognize that this is one facet truly of a much larger picture, not to minimize what they're dealing with, but it just shows you how vicious this really is. And so many other peoples out there, whether American or not, are either beginning to become under that boot or have been for a long time. And it's just time that we're not afraid to say that, and call these people out for either their malicious actions, their engineered events, or just the lack of concern for the civilian in anything that they do. And that's everywhere today. So I want to make sure, let's talk about this for a minute. I mean, unless you want to get anything else. I mean, I just started reading this, Burn Back Better, which I love. I think that's hilariously perfect. It's exactly, brings everything together. And that's kind of one of the things that I think is important, is it does bring in the concept, Build Back Better, what happened there, and the overlaps and so on. So go ahead. You want to talk about this for a second and tell us? Go ahead.
Well, you hit it right on the head right there. Well, we've been hearing this proverbial statement for years now. It's kind of like this psychological, brainwashing. We're going to build back better, and we're going to build it back better. And, we just hear it over and over again. But what do we actually see? They burn it, and then they blame it, and then they steal it, and then they'll build on it, right? And, Lahaina is one place, but this is a theme on the whole world. I mean, we're watching, our food crisis in America be burned up before our very eyes. Greece, California. I mean, there's just so many places that you can scratch your head and go, well, there's a lot of similarities there. Even to the point of Acapulco just this last week, completely flattened. And conveniently enough, they were on the Smart City Conference earlier this year. So, is there a large, nefarious game plan and playbook that's being had by these elites and these sociopaths and psychopaths that are behind the shadows? Absolutely. The vaccine agenda was only one part of it. This is a depopulation agenda by every means, and disaster capitalism is going to be a huge way they accomplish that, because if they can burn the people into the areas they want them to go, they're more easily controlled. And, we've been doing this since the beginning of time. When humans don't have a fair playing ground, they use fire. And, that's what's happening in this civilization right now before our very eyes. And so, Burn Back Better, it is a collection of evidence, of testimony. It's truly a full dissertation, even to the point where everything is cited and resourced in the back of the book. So you can actually go see where we've found it or listen to survivors themselves. But, also just touching on the fact that, what does this mean for the rest of the world? Lahaina is only just one, and this is not something that they're going to stop at. So, we're just hoping that it helps lift the veil. When you could go through the book, you'll see the extensive amount of details and actually game planning that they did before the fire. And, they kind of already laid the pathway beforehand. And so just kind of teaching people on how to do that themselves, wherever you live, whatever town or city or country you might be, and just paying attention to these details beforehand and just revealing the truth before these evil people even get a chance to have their way.
Right. Well, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that might balk at the idea that this is some larger agenda. There's plenty of evidence to back up the clear possibility of that being the case. But regardless of your opinion, it's obvious that there's something wrong here. Like that, whatever we decide to pinpoint as the reason is that, I mean, that's a kind of a fluid point for a lot of people. And we always tend to maybe disagree on what their intent was. But this is what I've always said since the beginning of this topic, but plenty of others, that we shouldn't miss the forest for the trees in that regard. And we just need to make sure we acknowledge and we point out that they were responsible for what happened. The accountability must be on the choices that were made, and then from there build the case to be able to potentially prove what you're outlining. Because I really do believe that there are some pretty damn nefarious agendas that go well beyond individual states or countries, and I think we're watching it play out. So I value what you're doing, and I'm going to continue to read this, and I'm honored that we were included in there with our interviews and the different information. So we'll include the links to this so you guys can check it out for yourselves. Awesome. And just keep us updated on what's going on in Maui in general, because I don't think this is just about Lahaina as well, but just anything else that you see, because I do think this is going to be an important story. So thank you for joining us today. Anything else you want to leave us with up to upcoming events? Or?
Thank you. And you're completely right. This story is going to continue. We feel that Burn Back Better is probably the first volume of potentially many as this investigation continues. And I've actually been told that Burn Back Better is going to be used in the lawsuit to help actually get these people. So, this is a full, dissertation to the maximum. And I feel grateful to help these perpetrators face their justice. So I really thank you for helping get the word out and bringing me back. And I'll absolutely keep you posted on everything that happens down here.
My pleasure. Yeah. And congratulations on that, because clearly that suggests or implies or directly shows that the work you did in there was solid and that they can prove this stuff. And so it's going to be used. I hope that they find the justice they deserve, or the people, as well as the justice laid on the people that deserve that to be held accountable. And, just on the way out, you did mention the smart city aspect of this, and we'll have to keep an eye on that too, right? Because as much as they tried to downplay this and they've deleted the older documents, and we've covered this, that it very clearly was the smart city plan for this exact discussion of Maui, and it was clearly laid out. And they've even omitted that term in the next year's outline, and it's just so clear that there's at some level something quite fishy going on. So thank you for joining us again, and I'm sure we'll have you back on soon, and good luck with Unjected. And I hope I'm going to be on there soon. Hope to join you guys. So.
Perfect. We'll see you on there.
Right,
Thanks, Ryan. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. And as always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
But this global pandemic has also created an opportunity to build back better.
Building back better, this pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts.
Now we have to accelerate because we are living the first consequences of basically climate disorders. It's time to rush, and President Biden is 100% right to do so.
Last week, I shared the outlines of my plan to build back better.
It's about building this country back better.
As Europeans, we increased our targets for 2030 and 2050 a few months ago. We need India and China to be with us. With Chancellor Merkel, we had a discussion with President Xi.
The Great Reset.
And I think we felt the commitments of President Xi on climate to work with the US and with Europe. First, to accelerate his target of 2030.
Our strongest beliefs are challenged by the rise of a yet unknown new world order.
A new world order that China has to be part of the process of creating it, and they have to buy in, they have to own it. Really need to bring China into the creation of a new world order.
Partnership and cooperation among nations is not a choice. It is the only way. Now is the time to join together through constant cooperation and strong institutions and shared sacrifice and a global commitment to progress to meet the challenges of the 21st century.
Build it back better.